All right, cost of capital problem number 2. I know a company is currently priced at $91.22, has a total amount of 15.1 million shares outstanding. The company currently has debt with a total face value of $4.2 billion. And these outstanding bonds are currently priced to yield 5.4% while quoting 101% of total face value. The company recently paid a dividend to common stockholders of $2.50 and anticipates growing the dividend at a constant rate of 10% per year indefinitely. The tax rate's 34%. So what is the WACC of this company? Okay. So just like we did in the previous cost of capital problem, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put all of the inputs that you need to solve this problem here in Excel. And I had an important discussion at the beginning of the previous video, the cost of capital problem 1 video, where we talked about sometimes firms just need to know what their cost of capital is without even evaluating a project. Does that make sense? So their day-to-day operations, a firm, if they know what their cost of capital is, then they can, whenever a project comes up, and they can easily sift through the projects that they should evaluate versus the projects they shouldn't. If the cost of capital is 10%, then the firm will always know that whatever they invest in needs to be more than 10%. And that's an easy way to sift out projects that will be profitable and projects that won't. So in this second problem, we're not evaluating a project here either. What's happening is we're going to calculate the market value of equity using the price per share and the shares outstanding. We're going to calculate the market value of debt using the total face value of the bonds, and we're going to multiply that by what the market is pricing those bonds at. Okay, and that's going to give us the total market value of the firm. So we're going to make the assumption that the firm is at its optimal debt to equity ratio. Okay. They're at their optimal debt to equity ratio, so anything that's going to be financed in the future is not going to change the way that the entire firm is financed. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay? So E is going to be equal to 91.22 times 15.1 million. So E is going to equal 1.377 billion. Okay? These are in millions. Now this is important because I've given you face value of debt as in billions. So I'm going to say 1.01, that's the percent, that's what the bonds are currently quoting at. The market is pricing these bonds at a premium. And I'm going to multiply that by 4.2 billion. Okay? But I'm going to put that number in millions because my E is in millions. All right? So this is, I have 4.2 billion in market value of debt, 1.377 billion in market value of equity. I'm going to sum those up to get V. Okay. And I got 5.6 billion in total market value. Notice here, the outstanding bonds are currently priced to yield 5.4%, so my cost of debt, my before-tax cost of debt, is 5.4%. My tax rate's 0.34. And the last thing I need to do is calculate the required return by shareholders. Recall that we can solve this one of 3 ways: the dividend growth model, the CAPM, or historical returns. At least this is what we've talked about in class. Okay. And notice I'm going to use the dividend growth model here, where the dividend growth model tells me that the required rate of return is equal to the dividend yield, the ratio of the dividend to be paid out next period over the price today, plus the growth rate. Okay? This is just the dividend growth model. I've just transformed this algebraically to solve for the required rate of return. Come back down here to my second problem. So what I'm going to do, R is equal to the dividend to be paid next period. And notice the company recently paid a dividend to common stockholders. Is that D0 or D1? Hopefully you understand that if they recently paid that dividend, that means it's D0, and we need to get D1, which is going to be $2.50, and they grow that dividend at a constant rate of 10% per year indefinitely. So D1 is going to be $2.50 times 1 plus the growth rate, which is 1.1. Okay, In other words, D1 is going to be 10% higher than $2.50. So I'm going to say equals 250 times 1.1. That's going to give me D1. Okay. I'm going to divide that number by the price today, 91.22. So this is my dividend yield plus the growth rate of 10%. Okay. And this is going to give me a cost of equity. I have the formula up there for those of you who are still writing. I have the formula up there in that window. So this gives us the cost of equity, or the return required by shareholders. Now we have all of our inputs. Let's go ahead and solve for our WACC. Recall the WACC is equal to E over V. This is the weight of equity financing times the return required by shareholders. Okay. Plus the weight of debt financing, D over V. Need another set of parentheses here, sorry. I'm going to multiply that by my cost of debt. And I'm going to multiply that by 1 minus the tax rate, which is 0.66. I'll let you get that in your notes. In fact, let me scroll up so you see the WACC formula and how we've calculated it here in Excel. E over V times RE, that's this portion of the equation, plus D over V times RD times 1 minus tau. It's this D over V times RD times 1 minus tau. When I hit enter, I get a cost of capital of 5.88%. Notice that's super low, okay? Now might be a good time to talk about something. Notice that this cost of capital is really low. It's only 6%. And one of the reasons is we get a tax break when we use debt, and this firm has used a lot of debt, okay? Now it's important to note something here. Sometimes firms will have the temptation to use more debt when financing investment projects than equity because it's cheaper, right? So notice something. Let's say we've been talking about this problem all semester long. We have a firm that wants to invest in a marketing campaign, $7, $10, and $12 million in each of the next 3 years. Is this thing going to be profitable? Well, listen, the likelihood of it being profitable is going to depend on what that cost of capital is, and the lower the cost of capital, the higher the present value of these future cash flows. So there might be a temptation by some firms to get this cost of capital to be really low because, say, they want to invest in this marketing campaign. Does that make sense? And so they might, what they might do is try to finance these investment projects using more debt than maybe they should. Does that make sense? And so, so keep that in mind. There's going to be a tendency for some firms to finance things with debt. During 2008, AIG, the insurance giant that eventually was bailed out, had a debt-to-equity ratio of 38-1, 32-1, I think, something crazy, right? There are other firms that became over-levered prior to the financial crisis, and when the financial crisis happened, they didn't have the ability to withstand potential bankruptcy risk. Does this make sense? So it's important to understand that while this WACC is really low, that WACC depends heavily on how you finance the investments. The more debt you use, the WACC will likely go down, and that will be important to understand.